Hello there. Happy Thursday. I don't know what the weather's like where you live, but it is windy like crazy outside. I took my Chihuahua out this morning and I am surprised he didn't blow away. So, I mean, he kind of blew away. He made it. We made it fine. Anyway, I'm definitely not getting a run in this afternoon. It's fine. Apparently, I already walked combined 123 miles in April, so I feel like I'm doing just fine, thanks. Okay, so today I promised to talk about what to do on the day you're taking your exams. Still with the focus on the idea that the exams are probably going to be some form of online. I think that's still important to consider because you are going to be in your own space, which actually changes this a little bit from what if you were going someplace to take an exam, but not completely. So there's a lot of things that are still the same. All right. One of the things, well, first of all, if you know you have an exam take the next day, get a good night's sleep. Don't stay up cramming. It doesn't work. The little like zombie things in your brain that need sleep eat up the bits that are trying to learn new stuff when you don't get sleep. That's the easiest way to describe it. Sleep. But if you've been following all the previous suggestions, hopefully you're not cramming anyway. You've been recalling, you've been practicing, you've been using techniques, you've got your mnemonics, you've got your stuff set up. Sleep. Okay. Now that I've done that. Mornings. So what should you specifically do in the morning? So should you always get up and have like the best possible, breakfast and whatever on the day of an exam? I always ask my students this question, and a lot of times they're like, oh yeah, and I'm like, actually, it's a little more nuanced than that, and let me tell you why. If you are a person who does well with breakfast, and sometimes you don't grab it, but then you're not as functional a human being and you would like to have breakfast, dude, yes, make yourself a plan on the day of an exam to get up and have an appropriate breakfast at an appropriate time. Not too close to the exam. You do not want your digestive system to be the star. You want your brain to be the star. So you got to give time for the stuff from your digestive system to get to your brain. But yes, do that. On the other hand, if you are a person who doesn't do well with breakfast, never eats breakfast, doesn't eat breakfast, isn't hungry for breakfast, any number of things, intermittent fasts like I usually do, not today, don't ask, then don't force yourself to because you think it's something you should do. I'm way against that. You really shouldn't do that. It's going to be better off for you if you do the thing you are more accustomed to and that your body likes. So, same thing with coffee, by the way. If you're a coffee drinker, don't skip the coffee. If you're not a coffee drinker, don't start the coffee because your body's going to be messed up either way. Caffeine is one hell of a drug. You should use it effectively. I use it very effectively. I have ADHD, and so it's my afternoon stimulant now, which is super great. Take my Adderall in the morning. I take my mate in the afternoon. I gotta try that when I start going back to work. I have no idea what I'm going to do when I actually am back to reality. So that's my suggestions there. So essentially, your morning routine should not get that far off if you can help it from what you're used to and the things that make you feel good. Stick with that. Do make sure you are prepared. Even to sit down and take an exam on your computer in front of your space, you need to be prepared and probably even more prepared. So make sure you've got all your materials right there. You don't want to have to be running around the house for them. Even though if you think you know they're there, make a good list and have the stuff you need. Have paper and something to write with, even if you're not sure you'll need it. If you've got the capability and you're doing something online, scratch paper is a great thing to have, even if it's just a place to brain dump or something like that, which I'll talk about in a moment. Make sure you've got any of your books and materials that you need nearby because you might need them. Make sure you are in a space that works for you. For most people, that is some kind of quiet space. For some people, it is a space with some level of background, but nothing that would be too distracting. So you've got to know yourself for that. I go back and forth. Sometimes I work better with mostly nothing. A lot of times I work better with something in my background, either something I know and I can ignore, or some kind of easy music or something like that. I play music in the background of most of my classes in some form. I usually try to stick with things the students don't know as well, because then you're less likely to sing along and it's just sound. So, but you've got to know yourself for that. If you are in a situation where others are in your household, make them aware of what you're doing. Don't plan to sit down and take an exam and have the kids or the spouse or the animals come running at you. Make sure you know what you're doing and that you have a plan for it. I have a number of online students who have gotten babysitters specifically to take tests, but at the bare minimum have that. And in all honesty, in today's day and age situation, if you're in a situation where you can't do that, make sure your instructor is aware that that is a situation for you and it might get you in trouble. Because I think it's important. If I know that one of my students' exams got submitted late because their kid knocked something over and they had to go deal with an emergency, I'm fine. It's fine. Kids do stupid things. I got plenty of adult students who have kids. It's fine. So be aware of that. All right. So now that you're sitting down and you're working on the exam, actual test taking strategies. 1, as much as possible, go through the entire thing at least once first so you know where you're at and what you have to accomplish. You should have had an idea of how it was set up before, but it's worth doing. So make sure you know how many of different kinds of questions you have. Do you have some essays and some other things, in which case you're going to need to make sure you work on those? Do you have, problems you need to solve? How many things are in this test? What would be about the halfway point of it so you can gauge that with where your halfway point is? You need to have a sense of it. Then the next question always is, the next thing I suggest is a brain dump. So I mentioned that earlier, is that if you are capable and allowed in any form, and this works in a classroom or not in a classroom, take something blank and something to write with, and take a moment and write down all the important stuff that you can remember right off the top of your head that goes with this. You want to keep your working memory and your long-term memory routes as clear as possible. Things will be able to move around better when you do that. Therefore, rather than trying to keep a bunch of stuff in your working memory that you were remembering from recently, like really specific details or even any of your mnemonics, write them all down on paper. It gets it out of your way and somewhere else, and it's a reference for when you need it. All right, now, you look at the test. Where do you start? Do you start with easy problems or do you start with harder problems? I've seen a lot of back and forth on this in different places. I'm going to tell you what I suggest. None of this is really backed up by research or data, but mine is backed up by the neuroscience knowledge that I have. And so that's where I come to my concepts. So most people say start with something easy because easy wins get you where you're going. I actually say do the reverse. Start with something more difficult, more complicated, or that will take you longer. And here's why. Because your brain backtracks between 2 modes. It can get very focused or it can stay very diffuse. Something that is difficult is going to pull you in a very focused place. Sometimes you're so focused on trying to do something difficult, your brain actually has trouble accessing some of the extraneous bits that it needs to do that. If you have finished all the easy stuff and all you have left is the hard stuff, and you're stuck in focus mode for the second half of the test on hard things, you might actually get stuck. This is why I say start with something difficult. Start with something more complicated. Because the moment you get caught up on the difficult or more complicated thing, backtrack and do something easy. So if you're working on solving a problem and for a moment you're like, wait, I had these first couple steps, now I'm not sure. Hold it. Take that break. Go answer some questions you know. They might give you some information. That would be great. They might get your brain moving. They'll at least give you a chance to get back. Same with essays. If you have this capability to go back and forth between essays and multiple choice or short answer, oh my God, do it. If you need to. I mean, if you're writing and you're like, this is awesome, I got this essay sorted, cool. But if you're like me, which possibly means you have ADHD, you'll get through part of something. And then your brain will just kind of shut, nope, I just can't do this next paragraph. Then I need to go back and do something else because when I come back to it, I will be able to do the next paragraph. Also, if you're doing any kind of essay stuff, make sure you have an outline. It doesn't have to be a long outline. It can be like 6 words in a row, but as long as you know where you're going. Problem solving too. So same thing. Make sure you know where you're going. So, and then go back. Bouncing around can be very helpful because it gives your brain a chance to get focused. Then if you get stuck, to get undiffuse. Also, being able to break up certain aspects of it. So if you know you have 3 essays, but a bunch of other stuff, being able to put stuff between 3 essays is way better than writing 3 essays in a row. Even for you, those of you who don't have some kind of physical condition, like I have some tendon problems, my hands are all kinds of trouble. I can't write 3 essays in a row. But even if you don't, it can get taxing. So those are my general suggestions. And then my final suggestions are, as much as possible, always go back through it. I find this hard. Again, ADHD, if I saw a question once, it's boring the second time and it is really hard to read it again. To counter that, I do things in reverse. So I will look at an answer and back solve a problem, or look at an answer and double check that it makes sense with the problem. So make sure you've read words correctly. I was always bad at true false because a little dyslexic comes along with ADHD, and I'd misread words and then get them wrong. Don't change answers unless you're sure you misread the words. Not gonna lie. I know there's back and forth research on this too, but most of my students who got nervous and changed something had it right the first time and just second guessed themselves. Most of the time, your brain's actually pretty good at what it does because the stuff's in there. You're just trying to use it. And if you're not 100% sure you used it correctly, but you're also not 100% sure of this other answer, just stick with the one you got. Unless you misread something, like it wanted something correct and you put something false, then fix it. Other than that, you're probably good. So yeah, go back through as much of it as you can. Double check for things. Double check that you just answered stuff. I've done that. That things are in the right place. I've done that. When I was a kid, I must have misnumbered an entire math section of an entire standardized test because I think I got like something stupid, like 30 or 40 something percentile on it. And my mother looked at that and was like, yeah, you misnumbered it. I'm a math nerd, so we knew the difference. Okay. So those are most of my tips. At some point, I'll put these all together in a video. But hey, good luck on all of your tests and exams. And if you're my students, good luck on mine. You should take them right now because you have multiple tries, and then you can go back later and check them again. I'll even go over them with you. I will. All you have to do is meet up with me over Zoom or something. Okay. All right. Gear shift to COVID stuff. I'm not actually going to discuss a specific article today. I want to go into something that's a little more conceptual because I have conversations with people and I feel like people aren't understanding certain concepts in sort of appropriate manner. So I'm just going to discuss them as if I was talking about them. So disclaimer one, I am not an immunologist. I am a microbiologist. My training is indeed in microbiology, but it's environmental microbiology, not necessarily immunology. So most of what I know from a basic, standard biology teacher, smart level. And I do teach basic immune system stuff. But if an immunologist is watching this later and would like to improve upon my details or my science, I'm in. I'm always in. I'm a scientist. I want to learn. I feel like that's how we all should actually be all the time. Okay. Immunity. Because we keep having this, I've had this conversation like 16 times with people and I'm kind of like making me crazy. So let's talk about what it is first. So the concept of immunity is that your body sees something it hasn't seen before. It is then capable of producing antibodies against it, which are little chemicals that actually typically have sort of an attachment to it. So they kind of balance right to it, which marks it as bad and also activates a whole bunch of immune system processes that help to destroy it. When you haven't seen something before, this process takes a while, which is, of course, the inherent issue of getting sick with a bug, is that the bug does a bunch of stuff before the immunity part of your immune system is able to find it and kill it. Now, that gets even more complicated with COVID, but I'm sticking to the immunity stuff right now. But the idea is that also your body produces memory to this concept. It stores cells that were activated originally when it met this thing in different parts of the body, typically like lymph nodes, and continues at a low level to produce and circulate antibodies to those things so that if they ever come back, it is faster to catch them and faster to activate the immune response. This is key, that we're looking at speed, not perfection, but speed. Your immune system, though, is real good. Usually if it can activate quickly, so that first set of activation can take weeks to get to the point where those long-term real good antibodies are produced. Second time around, 24 to 48 hours, you've got the same numbers as you had after 2 weeks the first time. And that's really the key. Because then you can knock out the bug before it multiplies. Things move faster. So There are a couple different ways that you produce these antibodies. One of which is that a virus enters your system and your immune system is able to recognize it chemically and produce said antibodies. Another way is, of course, that we add something to the system that has a similar structure to whatever bug it is, but doesn't harm you. And then your body, again, finds a way to match up with it, says this thing doesn't belong here, and creates exactly the same response while no virus or bacteria is destroying you. That's a vaccine. Both of these have a very similar immune response, and they go back and forth. There are definitely some studies on various different things that say, well, if you get infected with the bug, your immune response ends up stronger than if you get the vaccine. But I have seen this both ways on different bugs. So the answer is there is no answer to that. Could be, could not be. We clearly do pretty well with a lot of vaccines. You know that because there's a lot of bugs nobody gets anymore for, particular reasons. Here's the thing I've heard a few times, though, is a lot of people who are saying, which is true, and I'll explain why, is we have no idea what the immunity against COVID actually means if you catch it. So if you catch it, your body does produce antibodies, but people are saying, well, does that mean anything? Does that mean you're immune to it later? I don't know if it means you're immune to it later. It's probably still very dangerous, and we shouldn't rely on that. And in the next breath, saying, we need to wait till there's a vaccine. And I'm like, guys, it's actually kind of the same process. And if you have problems with the first one, you have problems with the second one, and we need to have a discussion about that for reasons. Because they're very similar processes. So first of all, let me say why we aren't saying anything about immunity, because this is a novel virus. We know nothing about immunity beyond the period of time that it has existed, which is maybe since November, which is not a very long time, even if we can catch some of those early patients and catch some of their immune results. No good scientist worth their salt is going to tell you that people are immune immediately afterwards to this specific bug for a specific person, because scientifically, we don't have that answer. That's really important. We don't have that. We just don't. So nobody should say that. But here's what we can say. We can say that we have studied other viruses of similar types. So there are other coronaviruses out there. Not that many. But at least half of them have been shown to produce varying kinds of immunity that has lasted, at least in some cases, a couple of years. And that we've studied other bugs in general, and that most of the time we produce immunity things that lasts typically at least a few, if not even more, years, depending on the bugs and things like that. Immunity works in general. It doesn't always work on an individual level, which is why we're talking about this concept of herd immunity, which is an even bigger, more annoying concept, which is related to the idea that if enough people can fight off the virus fast enough, it can't live and replicate and transfer to places where it can live and replicate. Do we know how many people it's going to take to get to that point? No. Do we know how many even percentages we're going to have? No. Again, scientists don't know that, but we can take guesses based on previous bugs and other stuff. Usually you need very high numbers to have full herd immunity, but in a case like this where there's a lot of asymptomatic transfer, it's honestly kind of hard to tell. You might get a pretty good sense of it just because people are doing a pretty good job of fighting it off in some cases. We don't know. What I think people are being very careful about, though, with antibody tests, and I do believe in this, is that on an individual level, you having antibodies to something does not tell you how your body is going to officially react to it. You could have antibodies to something and still not be able to fight it off. You could have higher levels of antibodies to something versus someone who has low levels and both have the same ability to fight it off. We don't know. So, antibody testing is super important. We need to do it. We need to know how many people currently have antibodies. It tells us how many people have been exposed, which also changes numbers and epidemiology, which is also important. It does not give you individual protection, because every individual is different. If we do it large scale, it will give us an overall sense of protection because, again, we can, based on previous evidence, assume that if a large number of people have a lot of antibodies, the virus is going to have trouble replicating just because it's going to have trouble. So it's quite difficult in this case to say which direction you want to go with things. You could want to go in the direction where, and then you have to balance things out. So, of course, the difference between gaining immunity by infection versus gaining immunity by a vaccine goes beyond science. Because if your entire area of people gains infection by, or gains immunity by infection, a percentage of them will not survive the infection. Period, end of story. That's the way infections work. Whereas with a vaccine, most of the time those are safer. The numbers of people who die just from the vaccine are way lower than the people with the infection. Never say zero. You poke a hole in someone's body. Bodies do weird things. But overall, that's considered to be safer. So they could go either way. There's definitely a lot of places and things in talking about it. But you can't say one thing and not the other. They're both immunity of some kind. And they are both the directions that we want to be heading, because even clusters of immunity will be helpful in moving this thing around. I would like to, in my next run, so it's pretty much where I'm at today. Today we're just, like I said, general conversation about kind of how this works without getting into a lot of detail, but noting that, so TLDR, we do need to test for antibodies. We do need to know how many people have seen these kinds of infections and at what points. We do want to have a general sense of it. You are not individually protected just because you have antibodies. And although we can take some good guesses, we do not know what the long scale time frame of this is going to be. If you have enough herd immunity, something goes away. My husband asked me about smallpox and said kind of like, oh, do you think we could do that with COVID? And I said, no, there's not enough coordination, communication, and people who listen to other people to do that. And he says, so if smallpox happened today? And I'm like, I don't know, it'd be pretty bad. But it's got a much more visibly noticeable symptom, unless you, if you got a strong stomach, feel free to Google that. So that changes things. So I do want to, probably next week, I probably won't get to this tomorrow, but who knows, maybe I'll pop on in the afternoon or something, talk a little bit about Sweden, which is using this concept of passing it active immunity in a little bit of a broader scale, and why I both like it and realize it would fail in America. So I realize there are scientists on both sides of this, and when we get to that, we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But I hope I helped clear up at least some basic concepts. And if you want more science on things, I love science. I will look it up for you. Ask me your science questions, especially about COVID. Thanks, bye.